Hey guys, it's Petey, and I'm here to tell you about my new idea that I had 5 months ago. Let me explain. I was on my bed, the school year was almost over, and I had an idea. I was gonna make a Springtrap costume. Naturally, I looked online. I didn't like the DIYs though. One included a flower pot and boxes. So I decided to make my own. I took measurements, I made my own designs. Here are my actual designs. I did a bit of hunting and picked out my perfect materials. 2 rolls of upholstery, 2 yards of yellow fleece, a pack of plastic mesh, red and blue wire, upholstery thread, and yellow thread, like 6 tubes of vinyl glue and polymer clay. First, I used my measurements and made a paper mask for any last-minute changes. Then, I redid the mask with strips of plastic mesh, which I sewed together with upholstery thread. I sculpted the nose and teeth from polymer clay. Next, I started covering my mesh structure with upholstery. I started with a basic T-shape. I cut it as necessary to create the shape. I sewed the sides together and sewed to the mesh itself. To do the top and bottom jaw, I made smaller T-shapes and sewed it to the mesh. Because of the gap between the muzzle and basic head, I cut it and fitted a triangle to close the gap. Next, I drew all the eyes, cuts, and other details straight onto the foam with a marker. I went ahead and cut the eyes out, including the eyelids. I cut the eyelids out and just stuck them in, no glue yet. Next, I cutted the cutouts, not all the way through the foam. I made the eyes with plastic mesh circles. I painted an iris and pupil with white and black paint. The ears are just rectangular pieces of foam with rounded edges and the details drawn on. The top ear is rounder. I shoved the wire through the ear and into the head. The wire is tied into the mesh. Then I added wires. I cut a T-shape of cloth 2 inches bigger than the head T-shape. I cut ribbed shapes where the ears came out. Like the upholstery, I cut triangles for fabric and sewed them to each side. I sewed through the upholstery into the mesh. I cut another T-shape for the muzzle and sewed that on as well. I did the same for the jaw. I cut a hole for the nose and glued the nose to the foam. The ears I just covered with rectangular pieces of cloth. I used black felt for the bottom jaw. I covered the mesh and foam. I didn't have enough room to sew, so I glued it in with vinyl. I also glued in the vinyl lip for a smooth look. Then I glued in the teeth. I measured a square 2 inches larger than my original measurements. I pinned it together and cut out holes for my arms. I glued 2 shoulder straps and then glued Velcro. I pinned the shoulder pads and glued them as well. Like the mask, I drew my tears and then cut them out. This time all the way through. Good selfie of me. I cut a great big rectangle of cloth, cut out the tears and the armholes. Next, I did the shoulder pads. I cut a rectangle and cut the tears out and sewed it. Another good pic of me. I sewed the straps on and added wires. Then I made a simple purple bow and added it to the costume. Next, I worked with the arms. For the upper arms, I did just simple rectangles of foam. I fitted it to my upper arm. I then pinned and glued it. After the glue dried, I drew my tears and cut them out. I used black felt and glued it behind the tears to give it a rounder shape. The forearm was more of a trapezoid. One side needed to be smaller than the other. After I pinned and glued, I drew and cut. Same process. Beautiful results. A simple rectangle I cut 2 inches bigger. I pinned and sewed the piece on and cut the holes and tears out. For the forearms, I cut 2 identical rectangles. I pinned, cut, drew, cut, and pinned again. After I secured everything down, I glued in wires. The diaper was fairly simple. 2 strips of upholstery and 4 triangles. The back, the front. I added 2 extra pieces to the back. No comment. Then I covered it with fabric, the same way I did everything else. The thighs are not just tubes. They need to be longer on one side and shorter on the other. I cut and glued in a triangle but to change the shape and make it fit to my thigh better. I made them both mirror images of each other. Since animatronics have knee pads, I cut 2 round pads. The shin is a trapezoid with a straight rectangle running through the middle. I then cut triangles out of the knee pads and covered them with cloth. I pinned and sewed. I sewed them to my thighs and then covered the thighs in cloth and did the exact same thing with the shins. I got some slip-on shoes and cut and made some slanted boxes. I was going to hot glue the shoe in, but I duct taped it in instead so I could use the shoes later. After making the basic shape, I covered it completely in duct tape. I cut slits for the wires, then I painted them streaky gray and white. Here's my costume before I dusted it, and here's the finished product.